And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders today, the author of The Velocity Mindset, Ron Karr. Thanks for joining me today, Ron.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Coach Karl. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Tell us a little bit about the Ron Karr story.
God, there's so many pages in that story. Where do I begin? Basically, I've been helping organizations of all industries for the last 33 years grow their businesses in a short amount of time, if you will.
Yeah,
that's how we came up with the Velocity Mindset. I've been coaching CEOs and executives as well as working with sales organizations. And at the end of the day, for me, the goal is to get everybody to believe in the fact that they really can live and achieve what they really want in life as long as they do the right things to get there.
Yeah. You've got, I've read that you've got a number one premise, and it's called, what would the world be like if everyone acted like a leader and not a victim of circumstances? When did your realization come in relation to that premise?
As a young boy.
Yeah?
See, I grew up in a very harsh household. I was the son of a Holocaust survivor. And it's been well documented that children of Holocaust survivors sometimes are brought up in abusive households. Now, let's be clear about one thing. My father loved me very much. He would do anything for me.
Yeah.
But at the same token, he was a damaged individual, having gone what he went through. And also, people coming out of that situation want one thing only, to ensure that their children never live the horrors they lived through. So they basically recreated the prison environment, very restrictive in what you can do, very demonstrative, if you don't do it the way they want it and so forth. And so it was a very harsh bringing up. And at the end of the day, I did play the victim card for many years, up until my 20s, until I finally decided that I needed to get some help and deal with it because I needed to get the confidence back. So that's really where that conversation started for me. So excellent. I've lived it, I played it, and I've learned how to overcome it.
And that the victim of circumstance or people claiming or almost celebrating victim mentality in today's world can be really quite frustrating for those that don't celebrate being a victim, And let's be clear that bad things happen to people and they have a right to feel an emotion attached to that. But living your life around being a victim is just something that I think just limits our potential, limits the opportunity, and limits the good that we can all create in this world.
Well, unless you've been there, it's hard for people to understand how someone can live that. That's number one.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to live it, and it's very understandable. But you don't have to have a bad experience to live a victim card or to play the victim card. I explained it. My first sales job was selling copiers. Now, in 1980, I got that job, and I remember Royal Business Machines seduced me in the interview because it was right at a transformation for copiers where they went from liquid toner to the plain bond toner. Easy to transfer out, change, and the copies were much more crisper. And they were seducing me on the 15 copies a minute it did. And I asked, what about the collator? They said, don't worry about it. It'll be here in 6 months. Duplicated the same thing. Well, those two things never came. So I started going out and trying to sell my 15 copies a minute copier. And the first thing they say is, well, can it do what the big machine on the third floor does? Can it collate? Not yet. Duplicate? Not yet. Well, come back when it can. Yeah. Well, after not making a sale for 4 months and having enough doors hit me in the butt where it was bruised, I was living the victim. I was my company. I was, why couldn't they come out with this stuff? How can they expect me to sell this thing? And blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, enough. You can play the victim card if you want, but at the end of the day, you still have a job to do and you got to be successful. Otherwise, you're not going to make a living.
Yep.
So I decided to do something that most people will think is very against. It doesn't make sense if you're looking to gain velocity in your life, and that was the pause.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to stop to gain velocity.
Mm.
So in my book, The Velocity Mindset, I talked about the art of the pause, and also to have a board meeting with yourself. And that's what I did. I took myself to a diner and I had a board meeting. I said, look, what's the current situation?
Yeah.
Current situation is I got one machine that does 15 copies a minute. I can't sell because it doesn't have all the other stuff. So great. What's the conversation you're getting into? I'm trying to sell copier, competing against Xerox. Maybe you need to change the conversation. And then I asked myself, what does a copy really do? And I said, it's part of a communication process. So maybe that's the conversation I need to have. So I went on my next call and I saw an office manager and I asked her, would you agree with me that a copy is nothing more than a communication vehicle? And she said, absolutely. And I said, well, when it comes to that, what are your three biggest issues? And Carla was almost like, she was in a therapist's office, putting herself on a couch and giving all her woes. And she goes, Joe or Sally on the first floor have to make one copy.
Yeah.
By the time they walk to the staircase and talk to everybody, get upstairs to the third floor, then wait online behind all those big jobs, then come back down for the return trip. It could take 2 hours. And I said, how often does that happen? She goes, try the equivalent of 2 full-time employees.
Wow.
I said, how would you like that back? She goes, how are you going to do that? I said, it's simple. I'm not here to compete against that big machine on the third floor. It's a great machine. Keep it. I'm here to fill in your gaps. And what I suggest is you don't buy one, you don't buy two, you buy 3 of my copies, put one on every floor for all those 1 and 2 copy jobs, and you'll get back those 2 full-time employees. And I sold 3 copiers that day.
Wow. Just about.
And I started selling multiple copiers after that, but it was only when I stopped blaming my company.
Yeah.
And it was only when I said, what can I do differently? So that's the premise of the Velocity Mindset book that we just came out with. What would the world look like if everybody acted like a leader and not a victim of circumstance? And when I say acting by a leader, they do one thing. When something doesn't go right, before they blame anybody and anything, they start with themselves and they ask this one question. What could I do differently next time?
Yeah. It's very much along the lines of what do we know to be true and what is it that I've got? And then working from there. I'm interested to hear more about the art of the pause. What happens during the pause?
Well, number one, we also talk in the book about the stories.
Yeah.
So whenever somebody says something to us, or we experience something, we create a story as to what we think it meant.
Yeah.
Now, stories are fueled by emotion. So some stories, if they're fueled by positive emotion, they're pushing you forward, God bless it and keep using it.
Yeah.
But if the story is negative and it's holding you back, then the good news is whoever wrote the story can change it. And you wrote that story, so just change the story.
Yeah.
That's what I did when I had that pause, in the diner in New Jersey. And by the way, by pausing, what you automatically do is you lower the negative emotion that's engulfing you.
Okay.
All right? And once I was able to get beyond the negative emotion, then I had that clear conversation. Okay, what's the problem? What am I doing? What's not working? What can I do differently? Let's go try it.
So it ultimately starts with each and every one of us as a leader to accept the roles that we have as a leader and to move away from that victim circumstance. So the pause allows you time to actually assess, whether your story, your current circumstances, and create a bit of a strategy, I'm guessing, to move forward. So whether it's a change story, whether it's a shifted mindset, that's what I'm picking up from you, Ron, is that's what the power of the pause is all about, and it's internal. As we move and we start then thinking about people within our team, our suppliers, our networks, trust is a huge component with leadership, and we know that. Trust is the foundation well, I say it's the foundation of everything that's great in your life. You know, there's very few people that can pinpoint things that are great in their life and not see how deep trust has created that. So trust is such an integral part. Now, you speak to trust in the book as well, starting with trust. Why is this so important? And you speak about the chemistry and the neuroscience around trust. I'm eager to hear your research, your thoughts around that.
So there's three hormones in the brain that we concentrate on: cortisol, oxytocin, and dopamine. Now, cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. We have it inside of it. You can't get rid of it. The question is, if you're going into a conversation of influence, whether with an employee or you're trying to sell an idea or a service or product to somebody, the first thing you have to do before you even get into that conversation is you have to predict what the environment is. And for most cases, whenever we go into someone's office as a salesperson, we're an interruption. So if a person's in the middle of a thought, they're in the middle of a crisis, and we come in, even with a scheduled appointment, all of a sudden their cortisol is going up.
Yeah.
Because they're stressed out. And we are an interruption. So if you take cortisol on a continuum from 1 to 10, if you're 1 or 2 cortisol level, it doesn't do anything. It's not good, it's not bad, but it's not moving you. 3 to 5 is where you're energized.
Yeah.
That's where you really engage and you want to move forward. You get to a 6, you start getting some doubts, irritated, agitated. 7, it escalates. 8, you start tuning out. 10, you're gone, mentally or physically. So we have to understand that when we walk into someone's office, either a manager to an employee for a correction conversation, trying to sell an idea, that cortisol level on the other side is probably above a 5. So our first job is we got to bring it down.
Yeah.
If we understand that. And that's what a leader does. They understand the situation. They think ahead. So how do you do that? Well, most salespeople, and we do this on stage when we speak, you know, we bring 2 people up on stage, and whether it's a manager to an employee or a salesperson to a customer, they create the situation, they start, and then I stop it after 20 seconds, and I interview the person playing the customer, and I put that chart of the cortisol, and I asked them, you know, where were you before this conversation started? Probably about a 5 or 6. Okay, where were you after it started? Went up to 8. Why? Well, because they're talking to me about all the things they can do for me, and I don't even know what it is that they're here for, and I got problems on my desk.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So I take the salesperson aside, and I tell them to ask one different question, which is basically, you know, what are your 3 biggest challenges you're looking to address, or the 3 biggest things you want to happen this year? And when you ask that one question, all of a sudden, their demeanor changes. Their cortisol comes down. Now they're engaged because you make the conversation about them, not about yourself.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you physically change the chemistry in one's brain.
Wow.
So now you ask them the 3 things. They're thinking about themselves now. The cortisol gets to a manageable level. They engage with you.
Yep.
And then the oxytocin starts kicking off because now they're starting to realize it's about them and not you. They start trusting you a little bit where they start answering your question. They give you the 3 things that they want.
Okay.
And now they start feeling good about the conversation because they realize that they may get answers to what they've been looking for. So they start feeling good about the conversation. That's the dopamine.
Yeah.
But the dopamine only travels with oxytocin. You got to have that trust first before the dopamine kicks in.
Yeah. Excellent.
So we explain it.
Yep.
And then we show people how to use it in real time.
Wow. And I suppose lasting chemical reactions is coming through me at the moment. So you've described like an initial conversation or an interruption to a day. How much does that store for future interactions? So when we trust someone, when we felt that trust with someone, for example, is that something that you can always then take for granted, or is it something you've got to continually revisit?
Well, I think revisit is the wrong word. I think you got to constantly work at building the trust.
Yeah.
The trust is not a static thing. Every time you speak to somebody, you've either increased the trust or decreased it, or it stayed neutral.
Yeah.
All right. So it's not static. You can never sit on your laurels. All right. If you worked so hard over 10 years to build the trust of a good customer, and then all of a sudden you made a huge promise that they're going to get this huge delivery that's really important to them, and not only did you fail in meeting the date, but you didn't give them advance notice that it wasn't happening, they're not going to be able to trust you again. This happened in real life. It happened with UPS. 97 years, that brown truck came down the streets of America and internationally, and you can look at it like clockwork on your watch. When the UPS truck came, you knew what time of day it was.
Yeah.
It's like we know the sun will come up and it will go down. Well, one day the sun didn't come up for UPS. Their people went on strike. Unheard of in 97 years of history. And before that, because they built that trust with their customers through the 97 years, customers were really comfortable in giving them sole source agreements. But now that trust was broken.
Yeah.
And so now all those major account managers, and I know because I was brought in, I was actually invited before the strike to give a talk at a certain time to a group of salespeople from UPS. And it was right after the strike, and they're all sitting there going, okay, now what do I do? Help me out here, because I'm going into some really angry customers who gave us sole source agreements, and now they're telling me they got to automatically split it 50-50 because they can't put themselves at risk anymore. That's why you're working it each and every day.
Yeah. And in many ways, I mean, you've talked about a major breach of trust where supply wasn't done because people went on strike. But it can also happen over the most maybe innocuous, what some people may see as an innocuous thing. If I forget someone's name, for example, and I've been building trust with them, and all of a sudden my mind's just gone blank, and I'm in a conversation with them, and, just little things like that people can pick up on, and all of a sudden I've lost ground on the trust stakes with that particular person, because all of a sudden they're feeling potentially that they're not as valued, that I don't value them as much as what I potentially should be. So
I'm smiling as you're saying that because I forget people's names all the time. All right, so I'm very guilty of that, but I've learned how to overcome that by, there's ways you can have the conversation. But I think what you're really getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are people with the best intentions who make promises to people.
Yeah.
But then they get wind that they may not be able to keep the promise. And what most salespeople do, I shouldn't say most, but a lot, the wrong salespeople, what they do is they don't call the customer in advance and tell them.
Yeah.
Because they're afraid to have that conversation. They're afraid to lose the business.
Yeah.
But what they don't know is they're actually sabotaging their success.
Yeah.
Because here's one thing that customers can't deal with. Surprises. They may not like the fact that you're late. And then, you make a promise to them. They, in turn, tell other people in the company to expect this. So everybody else is making promises based on that delivery.
Yeah.
But if you know it's not going to happen, you're better off telling them in advance it's not going to happen, because that's how you keep the trust.
Yeah.
Yes, I can keep the promise to you, but you'll always have my word that I'll give you every bit of information when I have it. So that trust is still there. And your job now is to help them get over that issue and work with them so that you can reduce the impact it's having in the organization. That's what they value.
Yeah.
But if you're afraid to have the conversation because you're only worried about yourself and how that might lose the business for you, well, then that trust and that relationship is definitely going to go down the drain.
Yeah, for sure. Ron, the other thing that I'm really interested in, I talk to people, I champion what I call conscious leadership, leaders being very conscious around and with intention doing what they need to do to lead their people and being aware of, just their own self, being aware of their team. Now, you speak to a concept called mindful leading. Describe what that looks like to me. What does a mindful leader do?
A mindful leader is not tactical. A mindful leader is strategic. All right. They're thinking about 5 steps ahead. If I do this, how's that person going to take it? What do I need to be prepared for? How do I say it so they take it the right way?
Yeah.
How do I position it correctly? I'll give you an example. I was in one of my retainer clients, the CEO's office I've been on retainer with for a long time, and one of his production managers came in, was really upset that one of his workers was on a cell phone and was late and causing everybody else to be late. And so he comes in a huff and a puff. I said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I told him to get off the damn cell phone." I said, "What did that guy do?" He said, "Why? Everybody else is on it." I said, "What'd you do then?" I yelled at him to get off of it, and I stormed away. I said, "How well did that serve you?"
Mm.
And I role played that back with him where he was now that person. I was just giving him the same argument. And he stopped me and he goes, "I can see I wouldn't have even bought that for myself." I said, "What do we know about the guy right now?" He wants to be a master welder. I said, "Great. What do you need to be a master welder?" "You need quality and timeliness." "How's this quality?" "Perfect. That's why we love him." "How's his timeliness?" "He's late on his one job." I said, "So what you do is you go back to him now and have a totally different conversation. You say, 'Look, you want to be a master welder, right?" He goes, "Yeah." "You know you need 2 things, quality and timeliness. Quality is perfect. That's why we love you. Timeliness, you're usually really good, but on this one job, you're 20 minutes behind. What do you think we can do to get you back on pace so you stay on your track to where you want to be as a master welder?" And Coach Karr, miraculously, he started coming up with recommendations of what he could do differently.
Yeah.
And the issue of the cell phone never came up. That's a mindful leader.
Excellent.
Thinking ahead, what motivates this individual, what's not happening, what do I need them to do, and how am I going to present it in a way that they're going to want to be engaged and not argue.
Yeah. And that's what we talk about with better leaders. We need better leaders, and we need them to be, whether it's mindful leading or at least acting with some sort of level of consciousness. I mean, we see too many leaders just drifting through, like getting through the day more or less without that strategic outlook that you've just spoken about.
But that leads to something else. What you're also saying about those leaders is that they're more task-oriented than purpose-oriented.
Yeah.
And we want people to be purpose-oriented, not task-oriented. I have an example. I just moved to Florida, and I had a new cleaning lady, and did a great job in cleaning my house the first time. So I thought she knew where I lived. There's a house down the street that looks similar. She was supposed to be here on Monday at noon, didn't show up. 4 o'clock, I'm really upset. She calls me up. She goes, "I just cleaned your house." "Where?" "I've been here all day waiting for you." No. I just cleaned it. The door was open. I came in and cleaned it." I said, "The door's not open." I said, "I don't know whose house you cleaned." "Well, she cleaned the wrong house." She stopped in at a house that looked similar, had a similar number, and went in and cleaned it.
Yeah.
And what I couldn't understand is it didn't look like my house on the inside. Was she not mindful about her surroundings? But that was being task-oriented.
Yeah.
Cleaning a house for the sake of cleaning a house. It wasn't driven by the purpose, the end result.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by the purpose, the end result? You start with the end in sight first.
Yep.
Let the end in sight, what you want to accomplish, be driving you so that you make the right decisions and you work on the right tasks. Otherwise, if you're just task-driven, which most of the population is, you'll be doing a lot of work on a given day, on a lot of tasks. You'll be exhausted. But how many times in those days do we look at ourselves at night and ask ourselves, what did we really accomplish today?
Yeah.
I worked so hard, but I didn't move the needle forward.
Yeah.
So part of that mindful leadership is working with the end in sight first and then identifying the task, not letting the task drive your day.
Is that, so let's talk a little bit about purpose. Is that something that comes naturally? So if I'm a leader looking for purpose, can I find it in a place that I'm not inspired by, that I'm not encouraged by, that I'm not motivated to go over and above? How do I find purpose in a role like that?
So let's define purpose. By purpose, I mean, what is the end result that you want to achieve?
Yeah.
Whether it's the purpose in life, whether it's a sales call you're making or at the end of the year where you want to be.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. So when people hear the word purpose, they just mean, what am I meant to be in this world?
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's obviously a part of purpose. But we're asking, what is it you want to achieve at the end of a given period of time or a certain initiative? That's what you have to have in your mind at the very beginning. For example, if I go to Newark Airport and I want to fly to visit you in Sydney, and I ask the pilot where we're going, and they say, I have no clue, wherever the winds take us, would you stay on that plane?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. But what a pilot does, they do the opposite. They start with the end in sight first. So they start with Sydney. That's where he's going. They work their way backwards, and they figure out 3 or 4 waypoints, knowing that if they get over those waypoints, they're on their way. They factor in the potential storms, winds, all the obstacles. And then they come up with a flight plan that gets them to Sydney in the safest and fastest way possible.
Yeah.
That's what we want people to do.
Excellent.
Start with the end in sight first.
So, Ron, who's inspired you in your leadership journey? Who was the inspiration between, for the book, for what you've done, for the coaching and consulting that you do? Who's inspired you?
Well, you asked a couple of questions there. So people like Jack Welch inspired me. I followed their careers. Or Henry Kravitz, who was, he bought a hedge fund guy who bought a lot of companies, ripped them apart. Now, he didn't inspire me for that. I'm not a fan of that. But I was inspired by how they were able to get companies to work properly.
Yeah.
If you follow what I'm saying. So what really inspired me for the velocity mindset, I've always been talking about velocity in the 33 years I've been coaching clients. But what really inspired me was what happened to me when I gave up the gavel for the presidency of the National Speakers Association in June 2014. I was on top of the world, and the next 3 years I crashed. I had 9 surgeries, mostly in my back.
Wow.
Tiger Woods had 1 level fused. I had 9 levels fused. I still play golf, but 3 years were hell.
Yeah.
The surgeries, the pain pills, you couldn't move. And you start looking at your life when you go through something like that.
Yeah.
And at that time I was 57, and I was looking at all my successes, and I was proud of them. But then I also looked at all the things I didn't get to in life. And when I asked myself why, it was simple. Because of the stories that got in my way.
Yeah.
The reasons why I couldn't do certain things. So, I've been known to be a very good sales and leadership coach and expert and motivator, and I still am. But I was getting a little stale, and I was looking for a new purpose.
Yeah.
And I realized I don't like that feeling that I was feeling at that time.
Yeah.
When I realized that there was, I didn't do a lot of things on my bucket list, and knowing that I'm on the back nine of my life and I better get moving. So that need for velocity started really coming up on me.
Yeah, for sure.
And the purpose that it re-energized for me was that I want to make sure that people live the velocity mindset, so at the end they get what they really want, what's important in life, so they never ever wake up unfulfilled.
Excellent. When we talk about today's leaders and, more particularly building tomorrow's best leaders, what are some of the traits that you see that a leader needs today? And are they the same traits that we've seen in great leaders in history?
Well, what we've seen over history that's similar is the fact that you're not going to do things through your own efforts. You'll go further doing things through the efforts of others.
Yeah.
So how well of an influencer are you? How well do you get people to join your bandwagon, if you will?
Yeah.
What's changed is how it's done.
Okay.
And when I grew up in that sales job in the 1980s, there were a lot of autocratic leaders. They're going to tell you exactly how they want it done. Don't even tell them what you don't agree with, and they're going to dictate.
Yeah.
You can't do that today. I have yet to run into an autocratic leader in the last 10 years. The world's different.
Yeah.
And also, if you take into account what we're all dealing with right now, which is the mass resignation and the fact that, people are not going to stay with jobs that they're not getting paid right, if they're not feeling fulfilled and all that, they'll go get something else that's easier. Well, it's actually course correcting for a lot of companies what they should have been working on before, which is how do we create a culture that people want to be part of?
Yeah.
Because they no longer have to be there just to have a job.
Yeah.
That's what we're all finding. That's what's different today.
Okay. A real emphasis around building a culture that people want to be part of, as opposed to a job where they're directed 9 to 5 is the fundamental change and shift that you've seen. So,
and how they get people to buy in.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental shift. You just can't dictate it today. You got to win them over, and you win them over by helping. Here's the deal. If everybody wants to be a successful leader today, it's real simple. Dedicate yourself to the success of the people who report to you.
Yeah.
Make them successful. Don't worry about yourself. You make them successful, you'll be wildly successful beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Tell me about your relationship with failure, Ron. So what do you do when you've hit a wall, you've stumbled, you've fallen over, or heaven forbid, you've got this concept that you failed in your mind? How do you deal with that?
First of all, failure is not easy. All right? No one likes failure. I've yet to find someone who likes failure.
Yeah.
But what you learn is that we all fail. We fail more than we succeed. If you take Major League Baseball and you have a batter batting 300, that means out of 10 at-bats, they only get 3 hits.
Yeah.
7 times they could strike out miserably. You would think, wow, that's not a great record. But yet a 300 hitter is soaking up the millions of dollars that they're getting on their contracts. So that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So the point is, how they make all that money is every time they strike out, they learn from the failure. What could I do differently? Sometimes they get into a bad zone. They're swinging too fast and not anticipating, whatever it is. And they start looking for what they can do differently. And they look for coaches who can help them see it, because sometimes you can't see it yourself. But what successful people realize is they embrace failure. Not that failure is good, but they embrace it as to what they can learn from it, because a good failure is when you learn something from it and it pushes you forward.
Yeah. Excellent.
An example would be, I was really popular with this one company, a multinational company. I helped a lot of their divisions succeed. And this one division brought me in. It was a setup. I didn't do my due diligence properly. They felt that they weren't being valued by the rest of the organization because they were the only profitable division. So I come in as the expert, teaching them how to sell a price increase to their customers. And I would critique them in role plays. Now, when I critiqued them, I was doing out of the goodness of my heart because I wanted to see them win. But I made a basic mistake as a early on speaker. I made it unsafe for them. Because no one wants to be criticized in front of their peers.
Yeah.
And at the end of that session, I'm from New York. I had curse words in that evaluation form. I didn't even know what they meant.
Wow.
Let's just say it was a huge failure. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
There's no way it was just a huge failure. It was such a failure that when I walked out there and I'm sitting in my car, I was contemplating resigning from the speaking business.
Wow.
So I knew I had to do one thing. I had to call someone I trusted. I had to change the conversation in my mind because I was on a deep spiral down. And I called the client, believe it or not. Because this client brought me in several times. We've had really hardcore conversations, vulnerable conversations on both sides. We trusted each other.
Yeah.
I know he valued me. And I said, I need to hear his opinion. So I called him up and I said, Bud, I got to share something with you. And I shared it with him. He goes, first question he asked me, what'd you learn from it? I said, I have no clue. He goes, think about it. It'll come to you. Trust me, it will come to you. And he was right. So about 2 weeks later, it came to me. I realized that my cardinal sin was criticizing people in front of their peers.
Yeah.
I did not create a safe environment. So I asked myself, what's the critique of the role play? What's that for? Why do you do role play? Well, the role play is simple. It's to show people that there's a better way of doing it. Well, don't do it at the expense of them. Is another way you can do that. And so now the role play we came up with is one of my favorite things that we do on stage that people love. I turned it from being a role play to being a transformation.
Gotcha.
And instead of me critiquing them, I have them play the scene of a salesperson, a customer, or a manager, an employee. I interview them what's going on. I interview the audience as to what they think's happening.
Yeah.
I feed one question to the salesperson to see if we can change the conversation, and we do. And then I just ask them, what was different for you? I ask the audience, what did you see differently? And those two people now become the heroes.
Yeah.
Because the audience saw the transformation through them. So let's revisit what I did. It was still a concept of a role play, but it wasn't done from the point of, let me show you how to do it, right?
Yeah.
It was from the point of, you guys are going to be the heroes. Let's see what you guys think of it the first way, and let's see if you think of any difference the second way. And by doing that, they're empowering the audience now to go out and actually try it, something new, because they saw it work right in front of their eyes. I would never have gotten to that part. That's really served me well for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
If I didn't go through that failure.
So it fundamentally shifted the way you do role plays and the response and the learning and the transformation. So that's a great story, and one that if it wasn't for the failure, you could have continued down that path and then really sort of thought, well, what's going on here? I'm getting less work. I'm being asked less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be bold enough to say I would have continued down that path, but it would have been a short-lived path.
Nice way to put it. Ron, what's the vision for you going forward?
The vision is to make the Velocity Mindset a #1 bestseller. It's going to take a while because you got to get the legs under the book.
Yeah.
That's my vision. That's my purpose. And not to be a bestseller because of what it means to me personally. It's to be a bestseller because I'm really bent on that purpose of making sure that people lead their lives like a leader, not as a victim of circumstance, and that they're never disappointed.
Excellent. So, Ron, it's been a pleasure having you on the Today's Leader podcast. How can people connect with you?
So they go to velocitymindset.com. That's velocitymindset.com. There's a couple of things they can do on that website. Number one, they can take a free leadership assessment. 5 questions, simple questions. And remember, leadership is about leading your life, not necessarily just, if you don't have a title, don't worry about it. You can take that assessment. And after you take it, you get best tips and practices of how you can move forward immediately in all those areas.
Yeah.
So that's free of charge. velocitymindset.com. Also, then we also ask for your email for one reason only. Every week, we send out emails to our list of new videos I created, and sometimes the interviews with other people on how they can enhance their velocity mindset. So it's a way to stay in the conversation of the velocity mindset, and they get those free of charge, but we need the email so we can send it to them.
Thanks.
And then if you want to buy the book in any format you desire, there's a link there that will take you to Amazon. You can get Kindle, Audible, and or the hard copy.
Excellent. Excellent. And you certainly piqued my interest. If you see a free leadership assessment come through with my name on it, you know that you've influenced me, and influence, of course, is about leadership as well. Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing your insights today. Thank you so much for investing in today's leaders.
Thank you so much for your trust in me and for the invitation to join you today.